Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. I am thrilled to be here today with our partner, thanks to the National Association of Realtors for their partnership on today's program. NAR is America's largest trade association, representing residential and commercial real estate for more than 1.5 million members. With me today is Shannon McGahn, Chief Advocacy Officer for NAR. Shannon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Heidi.
I'm also thrilled to be joined by Jeff DeBoer, the President and CEO of Real Estate Roundtable, an organization made up of leaders who serve as public policy advocates for the commercial real estate industry. Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. So we are talking about housing today. This is a huge topic. This election has already been a tumultuous cycle, to say the least, and we're only in July. There's a lot going on in housing, and we know that the president just this week announced a significant rent cap proposal. There are a lot of other big initiatives that voters are thinking about this year as it relates to the housing and real estate industry. So I'd love to start with both of you setting the scene a bit and giving us a sense from your perspective on what are some of the most pressing challenges that we need to be tackling first as we go through this year and think about the future. Jeff, maybe I'll start with you.
Let's start with Shannon.
Oh, thank you.
We can do that.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Ladies first.
Well, first, Heidi, thank you, and thank you, Politico, for helping to lead this conversation about housing. And just as you said, it is something that we're talking about today, but Americans are talking about every single day. Recent polling has showed that a vast majority of both Republican and Democratic voters are worried about housing affordability and what that means for their families and for their ability to get into a home. And that's not just on the home buying side, but that is for renters as well. So what we see is that President Biden and his administration have been focused on housing affordability. I think the latest proposal is something that they're asking Congress to do. It is not likely to be something to move soon, and we think it's misguided. That these types of rent control efforts will have a chilling effect on development for more housing, and that is the number one problem that is making housing so unaffordable, is that there is not enough supply to meet the increasing demand. That inventory and high inflation, high interest rates, and to add another I word into it, insurance has become increasingly unaffordable. And so these are all areas that we're working in a bipartisan way with the administration and with Congress to make sure that there are policy solutions that will actually help more people get into homes that they can afford.
If I could double down on that, the rent control idea is a very bad idea. It's never worked. It's been, wage and price controls have been put in place during wartime. It hasn't worked then. It's not going to work now. It's going to discourage development and investment, and it's going to lock people in. And it's just a bad idea. How's that?
There you got it. We agree. Did you see our press release?
Absolutely.
But the Biden administration has been helpful on some housing policies. For example, they want to help convert obsolete buildings into housing, and the low-income housing tax credit, and some other ideas that have been carried around.
So as we think about policy, Jeff, a question I have for you is looking at tax reform. That's a major issue that the real estate industry is thinking about. We know that into 2025, we have some expirations from the 2017 tax cut coming up. What do you think those changes are going to look like? And I will also say, how do you think that tide changes depending on who's in power in the White House and Congress after the election?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't get to thank you for having us and Shannon for inviting me to do this, and it's great. I'm very honored, and I'm here representing 18 organizations, not just the Real Estate Roundtable, so I wanted to get that out. The tax cut bill of 2017, we were very successful, but that wasn't because we got tax cuts. We preserved tax laws that we'd worked on for decades to make sure that the industry was taxed on an economic basis. So there's a couple that relate to real estate directly, the pass-through entity provision, low-income housing tax credit. But a lot of these other issues were maintained in 2017, capital gain, carried interest, the 1031 like kind of exchange provisions and things like that. So we want to preserve those. And it's going to be a struggle, I think, as all of this in the whole tax code comes up. So we've got our work cut out for us. As far as which administration, on the margin, you can argue one issue or the other, but a lot of these things are going to come up regardless. Housing is a big issue. It doesn't matter who's in charge. We're going to be talking about housing. We're going to be talking about cities and commercial real estate and what's happening with office buildings and so forth. So these things, they're going to come up, and we're going to have to defend them like we always do, with facts and good analysis.
Something you both already have touched on is the tremendous housing shortage that we're facing. And we have, congressional testimony earlier this year from NAR. This number was staggering to me as we were getting ready for this conversation, that in 2023, the annual number of existing home sales was the lowest recorded since 1995. So Shannon, can you speak a bit more to the urgency here in addressing the shortage that we're facing?
Well, sure. And I think that, so looking at the shortage is also inventory across the country. And we put out a landmark report several years ago that shows we were about 5.5 million units short of a healthy housing economy. And that number has only gone up because you could not have supply meeting the demand right now. So that lack of inventory is something that can be tackled through creation of new housing, but also existing housing where folks may have an investment property, or they may have a retirement property or a second home that they're not using, and that we have had proposals on a bipartisan basis that say, here are tax incentives that can help unleash that existing inventory, and you could get millions of units on the market immediately. And I think it's also important to note, to Jeff's point, that as we look at the expiration of several provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I had the honor of working at the Treasury Department during TCJA back in 2017, and seeing so many friendly faces here throughout the convention who were part of it then and part of what that solution looks like going into 2025. If you look at what realtors are talking about and what consumers are talking about, and what is even in the GOP platform, is where are those tax incentives that can be done in a bipartisan way to help encourage that investment. We have bills like the YIMBY Act that passed with unanimous bipartisan support. Everything that we have been advocating for, it's all available on flyin.realtor is our website. We keep all of our talking points and policy priorities fresh and up to date. But every single piece of legislation is something that can come out of a Ways and Means Committee with a Republican or Democratic chairman, that can go through the Senate, that can be done in a bipartisan way and won't necessarily rely on the reconciliation process, but of course could be things like the More Homes on the Market Act that I mentioned earlier, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, and these have been going around for years. So I think 2025 isn't just here is a turn in the road for TCJA, but here is an opportunity for how do we evaluate the current economic conditions and the current concerns about housing and address that through tax incentives.
You get back to the proposal this week, that will impede new development of housing. So the problem really is supply. And a lot of it is local, whether it's long permitting or the NIMBYism and so forth. So applaud you for what you're doing on that, Shannon. Very good.
So Jeff, I want to pick up with you a little bit more on this concept Shannon was talking about there are a lot of bipartisan opportunities here. And a recent study from the University of Michigan cited that an equal 70% of Democrats, Republicans, Independents all alike named housing affordability as their top concern. What do you feel is standing in the way of what actually feels like a fairly bipartisan issue? What's standing in our way of actually solving it then?
Well, Shannon hit on it. The supply is way down, 5 million, I think you said, on single family, probably 3 million short on the multifamily side. There's just been a lack of production over the last 10 or 12 years on both sides for a variety of reasons. Some, supply chain, inflation on costs, labor shortages, other things, but a lot of it really is permitting, zoning, NIMBYism, issues like that would encourage housing. And it is a bipartisan issue. Look, you have to have housing everywhere, right? So we're looking forward to working with the realtors and all of our coalition on issues to spur the supply side of housing, which will help on the affordability side of things.
Well, and to Jeff's point, I think it's also important to note that these are not all federal issues, that these are issues that we're facing at the state and local level, a lot of that in zoning restrictions and reforms. And what has been interesting about that bipartisan figure that you mentioned is that you actually see that happening throughout state legislatures as well. So you'll have states that are solidly blue states creating the same type of housing policies or similar ones as solidly red states, because you're seeing that this is something that's impacting every community. It's not just San Francisco is expensive, New York is expensive. You're seeing that all communities are more expensive and every locality has to address it. We partnered with many of the mortgage bankers and many other real estate organizations with the Housing Supply Accelerator and how we can have a playbook. We put together, the American Planning Association has a playbook to go directly to mayors and to state legislatures and others on here are policies that have been working across the country that can be implemented. And that's an important conversation to have with all of our localities too.
You know, you talk about policies that work. One, if you want an example of a policy that works, the low-income housing tax credit is a program that actually works. And it could be made better, it could be expanded, made more robust, but it does work, and it helps provide the housing, and it helps provide opportunities for people.
So, Jeff, I want to take us in a slightly different direction here and talk about the housing shortage being so closely connected to interest rates. What would you like to see the Fed do with interest rates leading up to and after the election?
Well, let me step away from housing for a second and just talk about real estate in general. All assets, whether it's hotels, office buildings, industrial plants, data centers, you know, all of the forms of commercial real estate, which is valued around $17 trillion, about the same size as the New York Stock Exchange, oddly enough. You know, long-term people in the real estate business wanted interest rates to be steadily rising over the last few years. A lot of people felt that they were artificially low for too long, that created too many problems. So, you know, when I say that we want interest rates to be cut, it's not just that we want them cut, we want them normalized to what is the true rate of inflation. We think that they overstate inflation because of the way that they measure the rent within the inflation calculator. So we want the rates to come down, but not just to come down. We want them to be normalized with true inflation. And it is a, you know, commercial real estate and housing, it also has been hit with the triple whammy. You know, you had costs going up, you had insurance costs going up, you had demand changing coming out of the pandemic, and then you had you know, values dropping and the back to home working and not working in the office, which has caused a perfect storm for a lot of assets. So all of this goes together, and solving one isn't going to be a panacea to the other. It all goes together, and it impacts jobs, it impacts cities, small businesses. So that's what we're going to be working on. Shannon?
Well, and the Fed, their own research shows that the typical homeowner has 40 times the net wealth as someone who is renting, and there is room in the entire real estate economy for those who choose to rent, but many would like to be able to buy a home and are just finding it unaffordable with the rising interest rates and inflation and just the post-COVID economy and the huge demand. But one of the other areas that we've seen is that people were concerned that millennial homeowners were just not coming into the market. Well, they did, and they came in very strong, and that has created that demand, while you see many older Americans who are trying to downsize. So creating an area where you can, they call it the missing middle, where you can find middle income housing that is available, and that is not, you're not going to go and be against 30 other people to try to get to that one house. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch kind of thing. And that's what our members are seeing throughout the country. With 1.5 million members, 90% of them are independent contractors, small business owners who are working every single day with consumers and hearing what they're looking for in this real estate economy. And I think that's exactly what all of our elected officials are hearing too.
Do you see existing homeowners locked in because they don't want to get out of they've got a low interest rate on their mortgage?
A low interest rate, and if you have investment properties or others, you have a big capital gains hit if you sell that home. So you see many are giving to family members, and they're not putting it on the market, and that's what we're looking for legislation to address.
So something that Shannon and I was really surprised by is just the staggering impact of what we're talking about, that the real estate industry and sector makes up 1/5 of the nation's economy. That really puts us in a much broader perspective. So from your POV, what is at stake if policymakers don't act, and what is the role of the industry in this?
And I think that's why, because it is such a large sector of the economy, and it does impact every single person, every single zip code, that you're seeing that it is such a bipartisan issue. So unlike many other industries where we are always working with Republicans, Democrats, anyone who is seeking a solution to help with these housing policies. So I think that impact is we're seeing more politicians who are willing to come to the table and say, this is what I'm hearing. Florida has passed massive bipartisan legislation that addresses workforce housing. And how do you ensure that teachers and firefighters and first responders are able to actually live in the communities where they work and creating the housing that's needed there. And you're seeing those types of policies travel around the country because what works is going to spread. And so that's where we come to play, and our members are in every zip code too, and we work at all levels of government to help educate and get these policies through.
You know, real estate's the only asset they're not making any more of. It's a joke, you can take that one. But it's very broad, as you said. 15 million people work directly in real estate. About $1 trillion of pension plans and 401ks are invested in real estate. About 60 to 70% of local budgets that pay for the teachers and the firemen and the roads and stuff comes from commercial real estate transactions and property tax payments. So when we sneeze, a lot of other businesses get a big cold. And Shannon's right. We work with everybody to try and get that point across. We have to have strong real estate values and growing real estate values. And we need an educated workforce. We need all of the other things. So I've gone on too much.
So we're running low on time, but I do want to close with, on an optimistic note. I always love to end these conversations sort of with a forward-looking, positive tone. So what are you both seeing that's giving you hope as we go forward? We've talked about a lot of bipartisan momentum. There's a lot of work that your organizations have been doing. But for each of you, what is giving you hope for the future that these are issues that we can solve going into and after this election?
Well, Heidi, I think it's these types of conversations and the fact that we're putting a spotlight, not just Politico and the organizations represented here, but the American people are, that we're seeing this discussed more in every day in the newspapers, on TV, that this is housing affordability is a problem, and it will take work at all three levels of government in a bipartisan way to get it done. And talking about it and discussing those solutions are the first steps to real action.
Yeah, and I think there's a misunderstanding about how we work. You know, we're up there trying to educate and inform people. I think you talked about the tax code. I think there's only like maybe 5 members on the Ways and Means Committee, current committee, that were there in 2017. Mm-hmm. So you have to go back and educate and constantly talk about the connectivity. And we're optimistic on all of this because these are good issues. The tax side, we think we're economically based. Housing, we need to improve those things. We're connected to cities, so all we have to do is make the case and get up there and talk to them. And look at Shannon. Who wouldn't say yes? I mean, go ahead.
Easy as that.
Well, we will definitely keep these conversations going. Jeff, Shannon, thank you both so much for joining me today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.